Zhou Enlai once reportedly said of the French Revolution, he said it for 1968, but it was construed to be 1789, that it was too early to tell. I think it's too early to tell. It could be. The Russian Empire was a hastily built contraption. Russia expanded to the Pacific, just as America did. But the American Empire was built on sturdier grounds, and Russia was helter-skelter, disorganized in the Soviet Union that emerged in 1917, collapsed in 1991. And now you could have places like Dagestan, Chechnya, and one could go on. Lots of different republics succeed. If, and this is the big if the military defeat is catastrophic, if the casualties are too high, which so far they are, but they're not too high, and if people start losing the shirts off their back and start suffering for food and basic services. Russia is ruled by a kleptocratic regime. It is not one built on ideology. Unlike Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Putin is not delivering economic growth or tremendous industrialization. In fact, Russian factories are reliant on spare parts from around the world, and they don't have silicon. So they can't do much advanced stuff without help from others. So yes, Russia could collapse, but the jury is still out whether it would. My personal feeling is eventually Putin is bound to go, because most dictators lose touch, and dictators who end up in wars that end badly don't seem to stick to the saddle for too long. And this war isn't going very well for Vladimir Putin. So he may have run out of rope, and the reason may not necessarily be just the war. The reason really might be the fact that he has presided over a regime that has engaged in massive theft, and there is no real moral or ideological underpinning to his regime. It's a faux Tsarism. It is Tsarism without the Tsar, with his private properties, with his fancy castles, with oligarchs, and just an absolute concentration of power. But at the end of the day, it isn't a regime like the Soviet regime, wherein there were true believers, and it's all built around a nostalgia for victory. And that might end in defeat in Ukraine, or let's say a Pyrrhic victory, which is often not much better. Russia has made its name as this mighty military power, exporting its T-90 tanks, S-400 missiles, and Su-30s and whatnot to many countries around the world, including China and India. Now, of course, its factories will have to work overtime to supply its own military. Also, many of its engines used to come from Ukraine. In fact, that is what the Indians are finding out as well. And so Russia will find it very difficult to ramp up its production and supply other countries. So Russia's strength as a defense exporter is going to weaken. Russia is certainly going to be on its back, if not its knees, and should things go very badly. Already, of course, Russian kit now has a bad reputation given the mauling it has had. But should it go even more badly, the days of Russia as a top arms exporter might be in doubt. But the Chinese might be looking at Russia or Russian disaster a bit more cheerily than the West. They could step in to supply the gap. Well, that is the real nightmare for a lot of my friends in the Pentagon. I have heard so many arguments that the real enemy is China and Russia is a distraction from some of these ladies and gentlemen. And the nightmare is that, well, China, through back channels and shady deals, props up a weakened Russia bit by bit. The giant pipeline that is being built to supply Chinese energy needs supplies Russia much of the cash to keep going. And over a period of time, Russia is too beholden, too dependent on China, and China emerges triumphant. And we get something like a Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire alliance, which could then take on the West. So Eurasian alliance could emerge as a challenger to Washington and European capitals. Of course, Russia and China have thorny border issues. They have a long border. They also have geopolitical rivalry in Central Asia. They've had tiffs even under communism when they were supposedly under the same ideology. But pressure from the West might be pushing them together. And certainly right now, the Russians need the Chinese more than the Chinese need the Russians. So they're certainly going to be under the Chinese thumb. A bleak winter, I suppose, after a tough summer. Russia is not in the best shape. Yes, its ruble is not falling to the same degree anymore. They have backed it with gold. Yes, it's a fortress economy. Yes, it can grow its wheat. Yes, it has bread and oil. But at the end of the day, Russians have not really invested in their own country and manufactured stuff. At the end of the day, the ability of a country to fight a war and win a war depends on its ability to make things. And that was what Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union was good at, for all its catastrophic loss of life and the killing of millions. Under Vladimir Putin, Russian oligarchs have bought yachts, properties in London, beautiful villas in Monaco and elsewhere. And Russians don't make stuff anymore. They export commodities. So Russia can certainly cause a giant crash of the global economy. It can send inflation ricocheting around the world. It can cause collapse of regimes and even countries such as Lebanon, or perhaps not necessarily Egypt, but certainly a regime change in Egypt. But Russia does not make anything advanced anymore, and it doesn't make silicon, which is important for the next generation of manufacturing. So the future for Russia is bleak, and there is certainly going to be a massive shakeup in the way Russia is run, and perhaps even the way Russian borders are drawn when the dust settles.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.